Hi, everyone. Welcome. It is my honor to introduce Mark Charles. He is going to talk about decolonizing health, and we're so excited to have him here today.
Yat-e. Mark Charles Yinishya. Tsin bake dene nishle, dotoy huglini bashes chin. Tsin bake dene dasha che dotoy chini dasha nala. Who was in my first session? Okay. Whenever people hear me speak multiple times, they always think I'm just a broken record because I always introduce myself. But in the Navajo culture, whenever you speak publicly, whenever you speak in front of people, you always introduce yourself. You always give your clans. So we're matrilineal as a people, and we're identified by our mother's mother. My mother's mother is American of Dutch heritage, which is why I say Tsinbeke Denanishle. Loosely translated, that means I'm from the Wooden Shoe people. My second clan, my father's mother, is Tohiglini, which is the waters that flow together. My third clan, my mother's father, is also Tsinbeke Dene. And my fourth clan, my father's father, is Totachitni, which is the Bitterwater clan. It's one of the original clans of our Navajo people. So the reason I always introduce myself whenever I speak publicly, even if it's just back to back like I've done today, is because whenever there's someone else in the room, especially if you're related to them and we're related to each other through our clans, that dictates how we interact with each other. Are you my grandparent? Are you my uncle? Are you my cousin? Are you my niece? Are you my aunt? Are you my mother? I will relate to you based on how we're related through our clans. And so whenever you go into a new group of people, you always have to say, this is who my family is, this is who my clans are, so the people in the room know how to relate to you and know how to talk with you within our cultural context. But also whenever I speak publicly, even though there's probably no Navajos in the room right now, I always introduce myself traditionally just because that is the way we identify ourselves as Native peoples. I want to acknowledge that here in Covington, we are in the land of the Shawnee. And the Shawnee, they're the nation that they were living here and hunting here, farming here and fishing here, raising their families here and burying their dead here long before Columbus was lost at sea. And they're still here. So I want to honor the Shawnee as the host peoples of these lands. I want to thank them for their stewardship of these lands. And just remind all of us to humbly walk on these lands, understanding there's a history that predates our presence here. I also want to acknowledge that I'm a dual citizen of the Navajo Nation and the United States of America. And I moved from the Navajo Nation to Washington, is what my people call it, Washington, D.C. I've been there for about 11 years now, and those are the lands of the Piscataway. So I want to honor the Piscataway as the host of the lands where I'm living. I have some slides, but more importantly, I have some stories I want to tell you. We're going to be talking about my journey to both decolonize my faith and how that led me into some processes of decolonizing my health. And I understand most of you work in healthcare, and this will probably have some relevance for you. But I want to, more than just give you a few Indigenous tips on how to live or how to be healthier, I want to change your paradigm a little bit about how we even think about health. And so I have to talk to you about some of the cultural context as well as some of my own journey as both a Navajo man and a Dutch man. Because my people are matrilineal, I am Dutch to my Navajo people, and because the U.S. is patriarchal, I am Navajo to the rest of the country. And so I tell people I'm not half, but I'm both. I have worked very hard to identify fully as a Navajo man to my people, and I have also worked very hard to embrace and understand my identity as a Dutch white American man to the broader context. And so I've lived on our Navajo Nation. We lived there for about 11 years, my wife and our kids and I. I grew up on a border town to our reservation. And we moved there. I was actually pastoring a church in Denver, Colorado. And I got to the church, and the first meeting I had with the council of the church And then technically I wasn't a pastor. I'm a licensed exhorter through the Christian Reformed Church of North America, which means I have the right to exhort but not to preach. Besides the spelling, I don't know the difference. But I used the word preach in my examination, and someone said, "No, you can't preach. You are an exhorter." Changed nothing about what I said, but they felt better. So I was elder at our parent church on loan to the Christian Union Center, which wasn't a full church, as a preaching elder, blah, 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 potato, potato. I was the pastor of the church. And my first meeting with our council there, and I guess they technically weren't a council, but anyway, they said, "Our last pastor introduced us to the process of contextualizing worship for Indigenous cultures, and we want you to lead us into that." I said, "That sounds great. How do you spell it?" And they're like, "Well," and so they introduced me. They said, "Well, there's this conference going on this summer. It's hosted by the Native people of Hawaii. It's for a group called the World Christian Gathering on Indigenous Peoples, and we want to send you and your family there to understand this." I said, "For nothing other than the sake of the gospel, I will pick up my cross and travel with my wife and our son to Hawaii for 2 weeks to learn about this process of contextualizing worship." And I met some amazing people there from all over the world. Indigenous peoples have been gathering for years at that point, trying to understand what does it mean to be Indigenous and be Christian, when most of their peoples had been what I would term colonized by the church. The church came in and didn't just say, "Hey, there's this guy named Jesus, you should get to know him." They came in and said, "There's this guy Jesus. He hates your dark skin. He doesn't like your long hair. He really despises your language. You'll be much better off if you can speak English and if you eat our foods and dress our ways and do the things this way and use our financial systems and all these things." They didn't come in to share the gospel with people. They came in to humanize the subhumans. And they're still doing that today. And I was meeting with Indigenous pastors from all over the world who were in the process of contextualizing their worship for this church that had colonized them. And it was, I could talk for an hour. I could talk for 2 hours just on that. I'm not going to go into that right now. But it started me on this journey. And as we were at this church, and as I was wrestling with these issues, and after being at the church for a few years, I decided if I was really going to lead our church, this Navajo church in Denver, Colorado, into this process, I really needed to go back to our reservation, because I grew up on a border town. And I never lived on the reservation. I didn't speak the language fluently. My grandparents on my father's side were both boarding school survivors. My mother's church ran boarding schools. And so there was no value for the language in our family. My grandparents were translators. They helped translate the Bible into Navajo as well as some of the hymns into Navajo. But they didn't teach the language to my father, so he didn't know what to teach it to me. Of course, the church I was a part of had no interest in teaching us the language of our heathen ancestors. And so I never grew up learning the language. And I didn't know the culture. And so I said, if I'm going to lead with integrity in this context, I need to go back to the reservation. And so my wife and myself and our son moved back to the Navajo Nation, and we lived on the reservation. We were there for 11 years. And for the first 3 years, we lived in a hogan, a traditional Navajo dwelling. It's about 20 to 25 feet in diameter. It's built with log walls. It has a dirt floor. There's a hole in the roof for the smoke to go out. You have some kind of fire pit, or we had a wood-burning stove, a big metal one in the middle of our hogan. It's one room. We lived in a community that had no running water, no electricity, which is pretty common throughout our reservation. And we moved in there. We were in a sheep camp. The family we lived with were rug weavers and shepherds. We were 6 miles off the nearest paved road on a dirt road. There was an outhouse about 50 to 75 meters away from our house. There were cows and sheep wandering around and dogs. And we moved there, and it felt like we dropped off the face of the earth. I quickly learned that the only people we ever saw living on the Navajo Nation were people who came to give us charity or people who came to take our picture. And oftentimes they were the same people. And I began wrestling, right? During this period, I was seeing the historical trauma of my Navajo people stemming from the boarding schools and the abuse, stemming from the massacres and the genocide that had been enacted on our peoples and ordained by the church. And I was wrestling with this. I was seeing what that was doing to our people with the addiction and the broken families and the loss of culture and language. And I was finding myself getting very, very angry. And I didn't know how to talk about it. I could count on one hand the number of non-native peoples who weren't immediate family who came to visit us in that Hogan that first year, maybe the first 2 years. No one was coming to visit us. Felt like we dropped off the face of the earth. And so I'd talk with my friends on both email and on the phone. And I would bring these up and start talking about what I was processing and going through. And every time I brought it up, my friends would get defensive and say, I didn't do that to your people. That wasn't what we were doing. And they would either shut down or even hang up the phone. So I learned how to talk about it in the third person, like I read it in the newspaper. That let me stay in the conversation. But yeah, I didn't get as angry. My friends who eventually would drop out because they didn't know what to do with it. And I didn't know how to engage the dialogue. And one day I was writing an email to my friends, like the 10th time, trying to get them to understand how it felt to be Native American living on a reservation in the middle of this country. And in my letter, I said, it feels like our Native communities are this old grandmother who has a very large and very beautiful house. And years ago, some people came into our house and they violently locked us upstairs in the bedroom. Today, our house is full of people. They're sitting on our furniture, they're eating our food, they're having a party inside our house. They've since come upstairs and unlocked the door to our bedroom, but it's much later. We're tired, we're old, we're weak, we're sick, so we can't or we don't come out. But the thing that causes the most pain, the thing that hurts us the most, is that virtually nobody from this party ever comes upstairs, seeks out the grandmother in the bedroom, sits down next to her on the bed, takes her hand, and simply says, yeah, thank you. Thank you for letting us be in your house. I wrote that, and that's it. That's how I'm feeling. I shared that with some people who were living nearby us. One man who was a boarding school survivor, had lived on the reservation most of his life. He said, Mark, I've always struggled to articulate how it feels to live here, and you're hitting the nail on the head. I started sharing that with my non-native friends off the reservation. And instead of getting angry and defensive, they would say, how do we say thank you? What does it mean to express gratitude to our Indigenous hosts? And if you came to my session this morning, you'll know that this is the paradigm shift we need in the conversation, because instead of having a dialogue about victim versus oppressor, I want to have a dialogue about who's the host people of these lands. That's the conversation we need to have. Because we have hundreds of millions of people who have never asked for, nor have they ever been given permission to be here. And they run around acting like they own the place. And we have Indigenous peoples who've been pushed to the margins of our society and are treated like unwanted guests in someone else's house. And maybe you're thinking, Mr. Charles, thank you is nothing. That's not, we need much more radical change. No, thank you is massive. Why? Because it's this paradigm shift. This country that calls itself a nation of immigrants, right? When we say we're a nation of immigrants, who are we excluding?
Those that are here already.
Okay, Native peoples. Who else? Nope.
People forcibly right here.
African Americans. People who were kidnapped from their lands, brought here, and enslaved. If you heard me this morning, I talked about a perpetration-induced traumatic stress. PITS. Has all the symptoms of a PTSD. Except PTSD afflicts the victim of a horrifying event. PITS afflicts the perpetrator. I hypothesize that PTSD has a it's known that PTSD has a multi-generational communal manifestation at a complex level that's known as historical trauma, which is the condition that afflicts people of color who've been traumatized, whether it's African Americans through enslavement, Jewish people through the Holocaust, Japanese people through internment camps, Native peoples through boarding schools and removal. But I hypothesize that PITS might also have a multi-generational communal manifestation at a complex level, which I would say is the trauma that's afflicting our white population. Not as the victims of a horrifying event, but as the perpetrators of it. Not knowing what to do with the past that they are standing on and benefiting from. And so getting them to say thank you requires them to acknowledge that it's not their house. It's not their land. They don't have a manifest destiny. God didn't ordain that they could control these lands from sea to shining sea. Saying thank you requires them to humble themselves. When I lived on our reservation, I made the decision, which has proven over the past 25 years to be the most disruptive, radical, life-changing, paradigm-shifting, theology-challenging decision I've ever made in my life. And that decision was I decided when I moved back to the reservation, I was going to do what my ancestors have done for hundreds, even thousands of years, which is I was going to wake up in the morning, go towards the east, and greet the sunrise with my prayers. I want to read something for you. It's from my book, Unsettling Truths. Watching the sunrise is what has given me the courage to explore the history that I talked about in my session this morning. I want to read for you some of my reflections. It's about 2 pages, so it'll take a few minutes. One of the most beautiful, beneficial, and sacred spiritual disciplines I have incorporated into my life is the discipline of watching the sunrise. It is one thing to watch the sunrise a couple times a year, perhaps on Easter for a sunrise service or when you have a 6 a.m. flight. Both times are beautiful and calming. If the clouds are just right, the sunrise can be breathtaking. But it is another thing altogether to intentionally rise 5 or 6 mornings a week and to be in a posture of prayer while watching the sun come up over the horizon. When you do this, you notice something very different. Yes, it is beautiful, peaceful, and even breathtaking. But when you do it day after day, week after week, month after month, and eventually year after year, something else happens. Subtle changes become glaring. Every morning in the spring, the sun moves just a little further north. Every morning in the fall, the sun inches a bit further south. The birds come and go, migrating in the general direction of the sun's path. It is quiet. In the spring, the sun rises just a minute or two earlier as the days grow longer and the earth warms as it begins to wake up, and in the fall, the sunrise happens a minute or two later as the earth cools and prepares to go to sleep. Even the days of the calendar take on a different meaning. June 21st is the first day of summer, and most of the hemisphere is celebrating. The days are long, the weather is warm, and school is out. Pools are open, barbecue grills are clean, and vacations are planned. But the 21st also marks an ending, and you can't help but feel a slight mourning, a hint of lament, even a tinge of sadness, because you don't just know, you actually see the sun has completed its journey north, and tomorrow, June 22nd, it will rise just a moment or two later as it begins another long journey to the south. The same is true of the 21st of December, the first day of winter. Most people are feeling glum. Winter is starting. The days are short. The weather is chilly. Almost no one celebrates the first day of winter as it marks a long, cold, and dark season. But on that morning, you can't help but feel excited as you find a new spring in your step. The sun has completed this long journey south. The days are through getting shorter, and a new journey is beginning. You are hopeful because you know, you see, and you experience the very next day will be nearly a few seconds longer as the sun once again begins its slow and hopeful journey north. Another benefit of watching the sunrise is the beauty of the sky. After a while, you realize it's not a sky as much as it is a canvas. Creator is not a far-off and distant God. Creator is an amazing artist with a personality, an eye for beauty, and even a slight sense of humor. Every morning is a carefully orchestrated production, complete with a musical score. But the production is not a play or even a musical. The production is the act of creating the piece of art. The production is the privilege of watching the artist paint the picture, shape the vase, and arrange the score. So the beauty is not just the final product. The beauty is seen in watching the piece of artwork come into being. All of creation is both a grateful participant and a privileged observer, not on a single morning, but throughout the fullness of the seasons. Birds sing, flowers bloom, winds blow, leaves turn different colors, clouds pass, animals stop, and donkeys bray. Yes, it is true, even the obnoxious bray of a donkey can add a praiseworthy note to the production. While living on the reservation, my daughter would frequently wake up in the morning and join me as I walked up to the hill near our house to watch the sunrise. As we walked up the hill, we could hear in the background birds singing, dogs barking, and the occasional car passing by. But the most distinct yet infrequent noise we heard was that of a donkey braying. We didn't hear it every day or even every week. It was sporadic and unpredictable, yet surprisingly consistent. Every morning we would listen for it, and every time my daughter heard it, she exclaimed, "Daddy, I hear my favorite donkey." If you've ever heard a donkey's bray, you know that it can be an extremely loud sound that quickly becomes annoying. It usually goes on for several seconds, and sounds about as pleasant as an untrained performer with laryngitis attempting to sing opera. Yet as my daughter and I watched the sunrise, we would pray, and whenever she heard it, her prayer included the phrase, "And Jesus, I thank you that I heard my favorite donkey." My daughter knew this donkey. She listened for his bray and became filled with joy every time she heard it. Only a masterful artist with impeccable timing, a perfect knowledge of the breadth of the tools available, and a bit of a wacky sense of humor could ever pull off incorporating the annoying sound of a donkey's bray into something as breathtakingly beautiful as a sunrise and still elicit both joy and praise from the audience. But the biggest benefit of this discipline of watching the sunrise has come not from enjoying the beauty or even from experiencing the seasons, but from an understanding much deeper in my soul. This understanding did not occur after one sunrise or even after 30. It began happening after months and years of watching the seasons pass, of observing the birds migrate, of feeling the temperatures rise and then fall. It began happening after experiencing over and over the long journey of the sun, first to the north and then back again to the south. The longer I was privileged to see this masterful and artistic genius of Creator, the longer I was blessed to stand in the midst of the grandeur of this masterpiece, the easier it became to acknowledge that neither I nor all of humankind, for that matter, was in control. Ultimately, this production is not ours. We cannot make the sun rise faster. We are unable to change the orders of the seasons. The birds sing, the flowers bloom, the grass grows, the seasons change not because of us or even in spite of us, but because of Creator. This work of art, this amazing, ongoing, beautifully choreographed production is our blessing to observe. It is our privilege to participate in, and even our solemn responsibility to steward, but it is not ours to control. For all of our science, our technology, our air-conditioned buildings, our chemically enhanced soils, our genetically modified foods, our dams, our weapons, our internet, and even our artificial intelligence cannot change that. Over the years, I have learned that one of the best ways to remind myself of my limitations is to follow the examples of my ancestors, to rise early in the morning, walk or run towards the east, and greet the sunrise with my prayers. And by doing that, for 25 years, it gave me the courage to look at the history. It gave me the courage to not try to keep things under my control as I allowed them to go further and further out of my control. And as I wrestled with the history, wrestled with our past, wrestled with what we did as a nation, I knew teaching it was hard to people. It was hard for people to listen. I knew the trauma that was experienced both of the people of color and of the white people who were hearing my presentations. And so I was trying to train our nation to join me in watching the sunrise. I would wake every morning and I would take a picture of the sunrise and I would post it on my Facebook page, reminding people daily. If you go back over the history of my Facebook page, you will see decades of sunrise pictures. 2015, I moved with my family to Washington, D.C. I came here because I wanted to wrestle nationally with the Doctrine of Discovery. I wanted to engage in national dialogue on race, gender, and class. A conversation I would put on par with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that happened in South Africa, Rwanda, and Canada. I would call ours Truth and Conciliation because reconciliation is not accurate. There's no previous harmony. We're restoring. We're trying to mediate this dispute for the very first time. And I moved here because I wanted to do something while President Obama was in his last year in office and Pope Francis was coming into the papacy. And I thought these two men just might have the courage together to wrestle with this. I already knew President Obama didn't have the courage to do it on his own. He helped keep buried an apology to Native peoples that was offered in 2010 Department of Defense Appropriations Act. An apology given to Native peoples. 7 bullet point apology mentioned no specific tribe, no specific treaty, no specific injustice. Said you had some nice lands, our citizens didn't take it very properly. Let's now just call it all of our lands and we'll steward it together. Put in the middle of an appropriations bill with no appropriations assigned to it. And with a disclaimer saying nothing in here is legally binding. And was never mentioned by the White House or by Congress. I hosted a public reading of that bill in front of the Capitol building, December 19, the second anniversary of its signing, or the third anniversary of its signing. I invited President Obama to come. I invited Congress members and senators to come. I got a letter from the White House. No one from the White House was going to come. I invited the authors of the bill who wrote the apology to come. They declined to come. No one wanted to take ownership of this apology. So I read it. Had about 150, 200 people there. We read it, and at the end, I exhorted our Native peoples. I said, we can't accept this. We cannot accept this apology, not out of anger or out of bitterness, out of respect. We deserve better, and our nation can absolutely do better. So I knew President Obama didn't have the courage to deal with it himself. But I thought Pope Francis might. Together, they might. In his last year in office and his energy coming into the papacy, they might be willing to do it. So I moved to DC literally for the purpose of trying to engage that dialogue. And Pope Francis came to the US a few months later. I loved it, right? He thumbed his nose at big oil as he drove around his little Fiat. But when he spoke to a joint session of our Congress, I was on the lawn, watching it on Jumbotron. He acknowledged the injustice. He acknowledged his respect for Native peoples. He acknowledged what had happened to us. And he said, but it is difficult, how did he say it? I forget the exact words. He basically said, you can't hold people accountable for the justices of the past. Which is surprisingly the same thing he said about pedophile priests. So we're not going to hold the priests of decades ago to the standards of the Me Too movement today. Wow. Anyway, he proved he didn't have the courage. So I didn't know what to do to engage this dialogue. I didn't know how to go about it. I won't tell you the whole story. We'd be here for several hours. Which I wouldn't mind. I have a circular perception of time. I like to complete the task. You have a linear perception of time. This conference has a linear perception of time. And so you will get very anxious. I won't do that to you right now. But in 2020, I decided another step to engage this dialogue would be to run for president. So I ran as an independent candidate for president in 2020. I had this crazy vision of building a nation where we the people might actually mean all the people, of addressing the racism and sexism and white supremacy embedded into our foundations, written into our document, of having a national dialogue on race, gender, and class. This is my vision. And you never heard about it because the press refused to cover me. The parties completely ignored me. I actually got the most press of any third-party candidate. I had the most stage time with other mainstream candidates. There were 2 Native American public forums that year, and I was at both of those. And whenever I was there, one of the best stories about my campaign was written by Esquire, by a Native author. It was titled, Elizabeth Warren was well received at the Native American Forum, but Mark Charles was the main event. But you never heard about it because no one else would cover it. Just like the apology, no one came to cover that either. And then in the midst of all that, we had a pandemic, which completely messed with my campaign strategy. Because if you want to be president of the United States, how did President Obama win the presidency? Do you know? How did he become our first black president, become the president of our country? What was his strategy? He was adamant he had to win Iowa. Right? See, the campaign doesn't start the year of the election, it starts the year before. And it starts in Iowa and New Hampshire. Iowa is the 4th whitest state in the country and has the highest rate of private lands of any state in the country. New Hampshire is the 3rd whitest state in the country and has the highest rate of home ownership in the country. Both of those states, retail politics is the norm. By the time the election happened, they've met every candidate in person. They've shaken their hand. They've had them kiss their babies. They've been to their barbecues. They're sick of them. So if you want to be president of the United States, you have to make yourself safe and known and acceptable to the white landowning men of this country. And President Obama was adamant he had to win Iowa. And so he made himself safe to the white landowning men of Iowa. I was adamant that if you want to be president of this country, you should probably start by talking first to the indigenous peoples of the nation. So I literally traveled the country in 2019, and I spoke on reservations around the country, laying out my vision, letting them know what I was going to do, getting their buy-in and their approval. And my plan in 2020 was to begin then introducing myself to the rest of the nation. Remember when COVID hit? Late December, early January of 2019, 2020. We all thought it was going to be, 6 weeks? No, 3 weeks? We just all shut down for a couple of days and we'd be fine. I got a letter from the Navajo Nation, my nation, in January of 2020, and they said they saw the Native American Forum in Iowa, and they were going to host one on our reservation. We have the largest tribe and the largest reservation of any tribe in the country. We have over 300,000 enrolled members, and we have 26,000 square miles of land. If we were a state by size, we'd be the 40th largest state. We're larger than many of the eastern states. They were going to host a forum. They wanted to do it after the primaries got started. And they were going to invite Donald Trump, Bernie Sanders, Joe Biden, and myself. We, of course, accepted to go. And then COVID hit. And they said, we're going to postpone it. But then the reality of COVID hit, and it got canceled because in-person campaigning ended. And I was a complete unknown. I would lie awake at night thinking, what if that hadn't happened? Right? What if? I'm not saying I would have won, but what if I could have shared the stage with Donald Trump, Bernie Sanders, and Joe Biden on a Navajo reservation forum? What would that have done to the campaign? Anyway, I won't go into that. So I went through the rest of the campaign largely unknown. Very difficult to introduce yourself when you can't go out and meet people and talk to people. And so after the campaign, I was wrestling with God. I was raised in the church. I've been a Christian my entire life. I knew all the journey. I knew all the arguments. But I was also like, God, no. I said, God, I have a book. I'd written this book already on Southern Truth. I said, God, I have a whole book of you bending over backwards to help Jewish people. I have 1,600 years of church history of you allowing European white Christians to act with impunity. I have precious few, if any, stories of you doing anything on a global scale for black and brown people who aren't Jewish. You say you're a God of justice. Where are you, God? Where are you? The arguments in my head, the day to God is like 1,000 years. I'm like, no. It's been 2,000 years. That's at least 2 days. Don't give me that. I hadn't watched the sunrise, especially during the campaign as I got really busy. I'm like, I have to go back. So during COVID, after the campaign ended, I began going every day and watching the sunrise. I would sit and commune with Creator deeply, praising Creator for the beauty of the sunrise. And then I would walk up the river and I would pray. And within 5 minutes, I was screaming at God. I'm like, what's going on? What's the difference here? I realized I was communing with Creator and I was screaming at the God of Abraham. Now, I know most Jewish people wouldn't see a distinction between Creator and the God of Abraham. But I would. Why? There's a book written about the Doctrine of Discovery by a very bright scholar. I recommend the book if you haven't read it. It's by Stephen Newcomb. It's called Pagans in the Promised Land. Because what happens to the pagans in the Promised Land? Genocide, right? They get killed. So I know Creator, both through the scriptures as well as through my own Navajo tradition, Native American worldview. And I can relate to Creator. Had I met the God of Abraham as a Navajo man, I would have been killed. And so so the Jewish people can see Creator and the God of Abraham as one and the same. I see the Creator and the God of Abraham as two separate entities of God. I grew up believing in the Trinity. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Father would be Creator, God, the God of Abraham, the God of Israel. Jesus would be Jesus. Holy Spirit would be the Spirit we see in Luke or in Acts and throughout the scriptures, most prevalently in the New Testament. But I'm like, I see a fourth now. Because I would have, if I'm honest, I have to separate Creator from the God of Abraham. And that started a journey for me. And I realized after 25 years of watching the sunrise, of communing with Creator at the sunrise, I knew Creator, right? No matter what happened the previous 24 hours, doesn't matter if Trump dropped the mother of all bombs on the country, or Joe Biden claimed our military was ordained vessel of God on par with Isaiah the prophet. It doesn't matter if we lynched a black man in Minneapolis or something else. 10 minutes, really? Wow. Sorry, I was going on a bit long. Anyway, I realized that Why did I say this? I'm trying to think how I'm going to fit in what we need to move on past this, but I really want you to understand these things. I realize that I got distracted by it. That's not your fault, but what was I saying just before this? The phrase, where was I going just before I said something about the 10 minutes? Yeah. And so I began wrestling with the distinction between the Creator and the God of Abraham. And it didn't matter what happened in the previous 24 hours. Every morning for 25 years, doesn't matter if we were torturing people in Guantanamo Bay, doesn't matter if terrorists attacked us on 9/11, every morning, no matter what happened throughout the globe, the sun rose. Every single morning. Humanity got another taste of Creator's provision, of this beautiful masterpiece that we were being welcomed to participate in. Every morning, no matter what we did, and so I would read stories in the Bible after this process. And I was like, that doesn't seem like Creator. I'm writing a book right now called Decolonizing Faith. I don't have time to go into all of it. But the purpose of the book is to cause a crisis of faith in the church. I'm writing this book as the grandson of boarding school survivors. And I'm asking some very, very difficult questions. Not to engage in debate with theologians and ordained ministers, but to talk with the people who are sitting in the pews who've been hurt by the church. Not to cause them to run away or get out of it, but to give them space and tools and even permission to ask these questions that we know we have. We're just told we can't ask them. Because I have gone through a crisis of faith in my church, right? That image that Rick showed of the guy sawing the log, right? He called it deconstruction. I would call it decolonizing as I'm trying to understand this. And there's some really troubling things. The book starts, right, with a Creator in a garden and ends with a king in a city paved with gold. That sounds colonial. I'm not saying it is. I'm saying it sounds colonial. In 1 Samuel chapter 8, the people come to Samuel and say, we want a king. He goes to God and laments. They're rejecting me as their prophet. They want a king. God says to Samuel, they're not rejecting you as their prophet. They're rejecting me as their king. God identifies God's self in 1 Samuel chapter 8 as king. Creator identifies Creator's self as king. That sounds like a demotion to me. What do we do with this imagery? Why, as the character of God gets further from Creator and closer to King, does the violence and the abuse and the nationalism become greater as Creator becomes closer to identifying Creator's self as King? Why does the psalmist define violence as love? There's only one group of people I know who define violence as love. It's people who've been groomed through abuse. What do we do with these passages? At the same time, my health was deteriorating. I had my hip replaced during COVID, after COVID 2023. My blood sugar was pre-diabetic range. My triglycerides to HDL ratio was about 4. I wasn't able to teach my daughters how to play basketball. They were asking me to teach them how to play basketball, and I couldn't because I had arthritis in my hip. I decided to get surgery after trying physical therapy as well as trying some steroids, and nothing worked. So I got my hip replaced, and I told my doctor, I said, I'm not ever going to take my health for granted again. I'm going to start taking my health seriously. Who's ever read a health book? A health book, right? There's a ton of them, right? There's a zillion of them. And they're all the authors have their one thing, right? Eat this or don't eat that. Move this way or don't move that way. Avoid this or embrace this thing. Do my one thing and you'll be beautiful, you'll be prosperous, and you'll live to be 150. Right? They all say the same thing. And they're not all wrong and they're not all right. So if you're going to glean anything from these books, you have to find some way to filter them. Some way to what do I give and what do I take? What's good, what's bad, what's not right, what's incorrect? And I'm not an RFK fan, but there's some things that are very short-sighted about Western science. And as I've read dozens of these books, and as I've interacted with a lot of these people, I'm going to list a few names for you. You're all in healthcare, so you're going to know some of these names, right? Let me bring some of them up. Hold on. Ansel Keys. You know Ansel Keys? Anyone know Ansel Keys? He's the person who started the low-fat movement back in the early 1900s. Worked with the government, worked all around the world. Read about Ansel Keys. He did some really crappy science. Did some studies that were not good. Anyone know Dr. William Stewart Halstead? Anyone know him? Who's in the medical field here? Who has gone through your internship? Medical internship. Are they brutal? They're hard? Dr. Halstead was the doctor at Johns Hopkins who kind of formed the first real medical internships. The guy was a coke addict, and he would go on these binges where he would be on coke and gone for several days and then come back and just work for hours on end. 36, 48 hours. Does this help explain your medical internships a little bit better? He is literally the one who established the standard for how internships are done. A coke addict. Who's read the book When Breath Becomes Air? Beautiful story, right? This neurosurgeon gets cancer, takes time off of work, cancer goes into remission. Then what does he do? Goes back to work with all the stress and all the crappy eating and all the late nights and all the lack of sleep. And what happens? His cancer comes back, right? And he dies. And the book is celebrating his life. Look how much he loved his family. Like, what the hell are you talking about? He killed himself. If he loved his family as much, he should have stayed retired. I'm not saying cancer wouldn't have come back, but it had a much better chance of staying in remission if he just wouldn't have gone back to that unhealthy eating and unhealthy structure and all the stress and everything else, right? All of these things. Who knows Gary Taubes or Robert Atkins? They're the low-carb people. The low carb people and the low fat people don't like each other. There was a study out of Stanford in 2018 called the Diet Fit Study by Dr. Christopher Gardner. Compared the low fat versus the low carb. Found that over a 12-month period, they were identically the same. No impact on weight loss. Some people succeeded, some people didn't, some people they were almost identical. So I'm reading all of these books, trying to understand how do I piece this together, and I realized that the filter I needed to understand my own health was the filter I was using more and more was how did my ancestors, my indigenous peoples live prior to colonization? What did we do? I really wish I had another hour. And so over the past 3.5 years, I've radically changed my health. I've lost close to 50 pounds. I've changed my breathing. I've changed my movement. I've changed my sleep. I've changed what I eat. I didn't go low carb. I didn't go low fat. I didn't go on a diet, and I didn't join a gym. There's a few books that were paradigm shifters for me. One was called The End of Craving by Mark Stradiker, who talked about how the low fat and the low carb people went at each other. He talked about how in the early 1900s we had an epidemic of pellagra in this country, the lack of niacin. Tens of thousands of people were dying every year here and in Italy. Pellagra is kind of like scurvy. If you don't have enough niacin, it affects you, you become sick. Eventually, you'll die from it. We're losing about 10,000 people a year to pellagra. We fixed it in 1 year. Do you know how we fixed it? We enriched our flour with niacin. And our wheat, and our rice, and our pasta. Italy fixed theirs over the course of about 10 years by telling their people to bake their bread communally, to raise more rabbits, which have niacin, and it's a cheap form of meat, and to drink more wine, which is made with yeast and has niacin in it. And they got rid of their pellagra in 10 years, but we fixed ours in a year. 10,000 people were dying. We've changed the diet for everybody in the country. Today, I'm going to go a few minutes longer. I won't be too much longer. There was a study done. Anyone heard of the Skinner box? The Skinner box was a study by a Dr. Skinner who was looking at reward in mice. And he put a mouse in a box, and there were 3 buttons in the box. One, you pressed the button, you never got food. One, you pressed the button, you always got food. And one, you pressed the button, sometimes you got food, sometimes you didn't. Guess which one the mouse pressed incessantly? No. Sometimes. Our minds crave risk. The one that always gave you food was boring. The one that never gave you food was useless. The one they couldn't stop pressing was the one that sometimes gave food, sometimes they didn't. Our minds crave that. It's how we get a dopamine hit. There was a class taught at Stanford in the early 2000s, or early 2000s, where they're looking at the Skinner box and trying to get people to use this idea to build apps. Who can watch just one of your favorite reels on Instagram, right? You go to Instagram, you watch your one reel, and that's it, right? Who goes to the casino and just pulls the lever once? Who can drink a Diet Coke and have no other calories for the next 2 hours? Who stays up way too late keeping your streak alive on Duolingo? Who has not gone to exercise because the battery on your watch is dead and you wouldn't get credit for it? This is the Skinner box. This is the dopamine hit, right? You keep scrolling through Instagram because you don't know what's going to come next. You get it often enough that you don't stop, but not too often that it's boring. You don't win every time you pull the lever. You don't lose every time you pull the lever. It happens enough just to keep you gambling. The house will never go broke, but you eventually will. Right? And so we have all of these things going on. And so when we started adding niacin to our food, so our bodies are not machines and food is not simply fuel. Our bodies are these living, breathing organisms that are really, really good at keeping us alive through incredible periods of food uncertainty. There's a study on the Hazda, a Native American group, hunter-gatherers in Tanzania. And they did a study on their calorie burn rate versus the calorie burn rate of couch potatoes in the Midwest. Guess what the difference between the calorie burn between the two groups is? Any guess? About 150 to 300 calories a day. One group's walking 16, 20,000 steps a day. The other's walking 4,000 to 5,000 steps a day. Your watch is lying to you when it tells you about your burning calories. It has no clue what you're burning. Why? Because your body is really good at conserving energy. If you exercise in the morning, you'll probably take the escalator instead of the stairs. You'll probably sit instead of stand. If nothing else, your body will eventually slow down your metabolism, so you just burn less calories. There's a 150 to 300 calorie difference. And so all of these things, right, we're doing all these things to our bodies to try and lose weight or gain weight, to eat healthy, and yet our bodies they're craving these dopamine hits, they're craving these little things, these reward systems that just keep us going for the dopamine and not for what's actually healthy. And so the reason we overeat frequently is because our body doesn't know what's going into it. Right? Our bodies have gotten very good over the past 70,000 years, 100,000 years, millions of years of knowing what a food is, how much calories it has, and what it's going to do to our body. Now when we eat Fruit Loops, which are refined flours with no fruit whatsoever, but it's enriched with 25% of our vitamins and minerals, our body doesn't know what it's getting. And so we eat our Fruit Loops and we stop craving actual fruit and stop craving actual vegetables. And so what I did is I didn't go on a low fat or a low carb or a vegan diet or anything else. What I did is I started putting in my body what my body knew it was getting. I ate full fat. I ate a lot of carbs. I eat tortillas every day. I eat ice cream every night. My ice cream has 5 ingredients in it. Look at your ice cream packet sometime. There's like 20,000 ingredients on that thing. My ice cream has 5. Milk, cream, sugar, egg yolks, and either strawberry, vanilla beans, or chocolate beans, cocoa beans. I try to put in my body so it knows exactly what it's getting. I worked very hard to not join a gym or exercise, but to make my life walkable. I would walk to the grocery store every day, about a mile, and walk back. And I would buy what I needed for the next 24 hours. So I'd have to go back 24 hours later and have to keep walking. I made all of these little changes based on what I saw my ancestors doing decades, even hundreds of years ago. And as I applied that filter to all of these books I was reading, I found myself getting healthier and losing weight. when I had my blood test last year, my triglyceride to HDL numbers were below 1. I had an obesity rate of 30, according to the BMI. I was down in the normal weight range. I lost over 50, almost 45 to 50 pounds. My blood sugar is consistently under 100. I completely was not even in the pre-diabetic range anymore. And so all of these things, and I'm really sorry that I went too long on some of those stories. I wanted you to understand some of these things. But what I want to challenge you with, and I'll end with this. The definition of nature is the phenomena of the physical world collectively, including plants, animals, the landscape, and other features and products of the earth, as opposed to humans and human creations. Western culture defines nature as separate from humans. And that's not true. We are a part of nature. We are a part of the food chain. We can't exist without the natural world, and the natural world can't exist without us. We are an integral part of the food chain. And if we want to be healthy, physically, mentally, emotionally, relationally, and spiritually, we have to understand where we are in the natural order of things. We are not above creation. We are not beneath creation. We are a part of creation. Our bodies are not machines. They are living, breathing organisms. Food is not simply fuel. It's something that we need. We have to chew our food. We have to do all these things around our health. And so my challenge I want to give to you today is a challenge I started 25 years ago, which will be the beginning of your journey. I want to challenge you to do what I did, which was the most disruptive thing I've ever done, which is to pick a point of nature. Pick a point of nature, a river, a lake, a stream, a mountain, a sunrise, a sunset, and go there consistently, 3 to 4 times a week. Not long, 5, 10, 15 minutes. Go without your Bible and commune with Creator there. And if you do that, I am willing to bet that in 25 years, your theologies will be radically different than what they are today. Your understanding of your place in this world will be radically different than what they are today. So much of our modern world separates us from creation. And the more we put ourselves back in it intentionally, the better neighbors, the better relatives, the better friends, the better co-inhabitants of this globe we will be. And then we'll have a massive impact on a wide range of the health that we need to work on. Thank you, my relatives, for this time. I appreciate this. I'm sorry we didn't have time to go into everything I wanted to touch on, but I hope this was helpful to you.